My guest today is Eric Goldstein, the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency in the Homeland Security Department. Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to join us at this during the Zero Trust Cyber Exchange.
Thank you, Jason. It's great to be here.
We just heard from OMB Federal CISO Chris DeRusha. We heard his perspective of Zero Trust and from the 50,000 foot view, if you will, of where the government's heading. Maybe you'll take us down to the 25,000 foot view, since CISA works directly with agencies in a much different way than maybe OMB sees it. So we're going to just jump right in there and say it's been just about a year after the President Biden signed the executive order. We're seeing some progress. What are some of the things you're seeing from a government-wide perspective around Zero Trust and how the agencies are making progress?
Yeah, it's really been over the past year both a revolution and an evolution. It's been a revolution because just as a threshold point, the principles of zero trust security, focusing on identity, focusing on managing devices, focusing on prioritizing and managing data are now, I think, really baked into the fabric of how we manage security across the federal government. And I think we're seeing that cascade across critical sectors of the economy. That's really a sea change in how we think about security fundamentally across the government. And that was really catalyzed by President Biden's cybersecurity executive order last year. This real change in cultural mindset that I'm sure we'll talk more about as we go on. But it's also been an evolution because, of course, having made that cultural shift in how we think about security, actually getting there takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And so implementing the architectural changes, the strong controls, the tight management of identity and authentication, that takes real effort. And so we have seen agencies progressing along their individual zero trust journeys as a manifestation of that philosophical shift in security that we've really seen over the past year.
All right, I'm going to pull the strings on both the revolution and evolution piece. So let's start with the revolution side of it. The fact that the private sector has looked at what the government's done with the zero trust strategy, maturity model from CISA, that's I know still in draft form, and then they've started to really look at this and go, wow, the government's really leading here. How has that kind of seeped to really change how industry is approaching CISA, how you're talking with industry, and how that critical infrastructure side is part of this discussion in a new way?
Yeah. Before the president's cybersecurity executive order, there was a general perspective, not universal, but widely adopted, that zero trust principles were attainable for the most modern organizations, perhaps running cloud native infrastructure. Of course, Google being one example with their Beyond Corp efforts. But for an organization that's running a lot of on-premises infrastructure, a lot of legacy technology, it was really seen by many as just impractical, just infeasible. And so the government really leaning forward, coming from the president's pen and saying, government historically not the world's fastest adopter of new technology, really running still a significant body of legacy infrastructure. Government was going to lean forward and really say, this is the right model, and we're going to go all in and make it work. I think that sent a message that zero trust principles aren't only for organizations that are running cloud native, that are running fully modernized technology stacks, but really any organization can make progress on this journey. That was also the importance of the zero trust maturity model that CISA published last year in furtherance and as an enabler of the administration's zero trust strategy, in showing that wherever an entity is in making progress towards a zero trust strategy, you have to start somewhere. And starting somewhere and making progress is really the only way to actually make progress towards deploying the kind of architectures and controls that we know to be effective against the most significant threats.
I'm glad you brought up the maturity model. It's kind of an aside. We'll come back to the evolution part, but any update you can give us on that maturity model? Are we close to seeing version 2? I wouldn't say final version, I know, because it's never done.
We are indeed. That's just such a good point, Jason. So I'll pull on that for 1 second, which is, this whole effort is going to be living, right? The zero trust strategy, the zero trust maturity model, our guidance for execution. We know that we are still learning as a security enterprise, how zero trust principles can be most effectively adopted at scale for different types of organizations. And so this is going to be a living and an ongoing effort for us. We received over 300 comments on our zero trust maturity model version 1.0, we'll call it. We've worked those into the new draft. I look forward to coming out with the new version here in the near future. But again, that's going to be the next iteration of what I think will be an enduring living document because we are going to ongoingly get feedback, not just from federal partners, but the broader community to understand how we put forth guidance that's going to be most useful in helping organizations benchmark their progress on their zero trust journey, understand where they are and where to go next.
So Eric, I see you pulled out the governmentese near future, the ubiquitous soon. So I will ask you a different way. Do you think later this summer? You think early fall? Is it one of those things that's going through clearance? So who really knows?
This summer is certainly our target. Our goal is for the maturity model to really be a significant improvement from the first one. Frankly, I think we heard great feedback on the first maturity model that many organizations, public and private, are finding it to be in practice really useful. And so if we're going to come out with a new version, we don't want it to just be a phone with a better camera. We want it to have some really useful new attributes to it that are really going to move the ball forward.
Especially as agencies have a huge number of deadlines coming up from the zero trust strategy under the EO. I think having that maturity model available for them to start to lean on and implement is a key piece here. So it's good to hear this summer is a good target. We all know how the process works. So we know that things can always move to the right. The other piece I want to go back to is that you mentioned revolution and evolution. We're in the evolution side. The culture shift you talked about. What are you seeing from an agency perspective about that evolution? How are they evolving using the maturity model or just the requirements under zero trust? What are some of the ways you're tracking, measuring? What are some of the trends?
Yeah. So we are seeing across the board agencies really begin to focus their security programs and their security investments on the attributes of zero trust as defined in the zero trust strategy and the maturity model, identity, device, network, on down the line. And in doing so, they can really more effectively narrate where they are in their maturity and defend additional resources that are needed to make the next step. And we've seen that really this focus, particularly on identity, on access management, on managing privilege, as really to be a critical focus, both on the zero trust strategy, but also if we pull back to why zero trust is so important, we have seen a series of intrusions and adversary campaigns targeting identity, targeting credentials, targeting privileged users. The campaign targeting SolarWinds devices being one example. And so really moving this focus where agencies and other organizations are taking an identity-centric approach and really moving towards principles of least privilege, strong, recurrently validated authentication, locking down credentials. That is just a critically important step forward, which, call it zero trust, call it whatever you like. It is really a sea change in how we think about security. And we're seeing agencies make significant investments there across the board. At the same time, we do know that there's real diversity across the federal enterprise. We have 101 federal civilian executive branch agencies. Each of them are by definition at a different point on their journey through the zero trust maturity model and executing the administration's zero trust strategy. And so our role at CISA is to make sure that we're putting out guidance that's useful across the board, but also giving agencies bespoke support and assistance where they need it to figure out where to go next and to get the resources to move in the right direction.
You bring up the identity and access management piece and the privilege piece, because I think that has been something that the agencies have been working on for quite a while. We can go all the way back to HSPD 12 back in 2005 timeframe. What's the difference today of the way they're looking at identity and access management from the way they looked at it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even 15 years ago? Is it a technology change, or is it more of a better understanding of how the role identity plays, or more than that?
Yeah, I would say it is a philosophical change driven by our understanding of the threat. And so even if we are using the same technologies, although certainly newer technologies like FIDO2 authentication, I think we're going to see being increasingly adopted across the enterprise. This understanding of the issue is not just how does a user authenticate, but also how are their credentials controlled, and really adopting these principles of least privilege, making sure that we are really locking down accesses and privileges to the bare minimum needed for a job function, such that if an individual's account is compromised, the adversary's ability to take actions on a network or move laterally are limited. Really strong adoption of role-based access controls to make sure that we are really limiting what users can do to make sure that again, we are limiting the blast radius of what an adversary can achieve, and then really critically, narrowing down the breadth of super users, of admins, making sure that those accounts are locked down, are closely monitored, because we know that that's where adversaries are trying to go, right? Adversaries are trying to compromise end users, escalate privileges, and get that admin or root access. And so if we can limit privileges by default, limit the number of admins or super users, and then lock down those accounts and really urgently hunt across those accounts for unusual activity, that's going to be directly responsive to what we see adversaries doing in the real world.
As CISA works with agencies, we know that there's been a big lean on the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program, CDM, as a way to take some of those pieces and parts and create that zero trust architecture. What's been the challenge with identity and access management from your perspective? What have you seen that has said, this is the hump we still need to get over, or this is the hump we've started to get over, but it's been a much longer hump than we expected to be?
With any category of security control or security measure, technology is part of the solution, but it also needs governance and workflows and management buy-in. We've seen that with asset management, with vulnerability management, with endpoint detection across the board. Each of those real control, those categorical control improvements, we have seen technology needing to be married with strong governance and strong leadership and strong process changes. Access management is no exception. And in fact, it may be one of the more challenging areas because it actually impacts users. If an enterprise deploys a new asset management program, a new vulnerability management program, for most users, that's abstracted, right? They're not actually seeing how the endpoint that they're operating on is being picked up by an asset management tool, or how updates are being deployed. But if you're all of a sudden moving to a least privilege model, that's probably going to involve doing a review of privileges and credentials, and actually probably taking some privileges away if you're doing it right. And so building in the governance and the processes to say, once you have the tech deployed, to actually understand what users are able to access what systems and apps, what should they be able to access for their job role, and then how do you do that cleanup process to move towards a real role-based access model, to move towards a real least privilege philosophy. That involves some friction for users. And so I think that process is really very individualized, not just to an agency, but really to the sub-organization that's being directly managed. And so I think the technology is there, the technology is effective, but building in that governance and process and helping users understand the point of the process has been certainly an effort from most agencies. And the government here is not unique. That's generally a characteristic of strong access management across the board.
Right. We all want to be able to go in and upload whatever software we want. Oh, I want that. I want to, and sometimes it's as simple as, I want to watch Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, and you get blocked and life becomes harder.
That's right.
Eric, one of the things that CISA is doing is leading or helping agencies with some of those 19 action items detailed in the memo from OMB. They had agency action plans that were due in March. Maybe talk about what CISA is seeing, or some of the things that CISA is helping agencies do around those 19 action items, knowing, as you just said, each agency is a different place, each needs help in different times.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are serving a few key roles here, and this really is a true joint venture with our friends and colleagues at OMB. This is an area where I think the model of federal security governance works really well, where OMB establishes a binding policy for the executive branch, and then CISA provides the technical guidance and a lot of the governance and technical assistance to execute the policy and the strategy. And in this case, we are working with OMB to review agency plans as they come in for progress and sufficiency. Where we see gaps in a plan, we are working with individual agencies to understand how they arrived at the place they did and help them develop a more fulsome plan where and if needed. I would note that most of the plans that we've seen from agencies so far really are taking extraordinary steps forward and meeting both the spirit and the letter of the strategy and the broader policy. But then, of course, the plan is one thing. Putting the plan into effect is something else entirely. And so that's where we're evaluating the need for more government-wide guidance. And I'll just offer one example. We heard from agencies that figuring out how to move to zero trust principles for their mobile assets was really tricky. So we recently came out with our zero trust guidance for enterprise mobility, which is directly addressing a concern that we heard from agencies and other partners of an area where government-wide guidance was really lacking. And then, of course, we work with individual agencies, both to help them think through technical solutions for their unique challenges, but also help them think through the resource implications of their broader push, whether that is working to enhance their agency budgets, working with the Technology Modernization Fund, the TMF, but making sure that they have the resources over years to make sure they can fully make the improvements needed to execute their documented plans.
I'm glad you brought up resources. That's always the concern when you talk about any new initiative. Usually this is a question that OMB gets, and it's something that, as folks heard, I talked with Chris DeRusha quite a bit about, and it was great to hear that OMB had actually set up, had thought about that idea of funding, how to get it. So in 22, we were able to shift some things, at least for those agencies that were impacted by solar winds. In 23, that budget request went in 20, and then some TMF help. And then 24 is really when agencies hopefully will have their budgets kind of centered. From CISA's perspective, never want to say you're awash in money. There's always could be more money, but CISA has been very lucky to get a fair amount of funding from Congress. How are you using some of that money that you received, whether it's through the American Rescue Plan Act or other typical appropriations, to help drive zero trust?
Absolutely. So we are certainly growing, but the mission and risk is growing as well. And so we certainly hope to continue on the growth trajectory as with agencies that are doing the work to deploy controls and measures on their systems. One area of new funding that's been really impactful in this space is the funding of our federal enterprise improvement teams under the American Rescue Plan Act. And this is a new team within CISA Cyber that's really dedicated to doing a lot of this focus, I'll call it almost hand-holding work with federal civilian agencies to really understand their unique progress in implementing CISA and OMB policies and directives, and then helping them to figure out in really granular ways how to make the progress they need. This is really a new function for us. We historically provided, of course, government-wide guidance and directives, and we provide sort of agency by agency assistance in the context of a security incident or a vulnerability test or a red team assessment. But it's the first time we've really had personnel dedicated to working directly with agency CISOs and their teams on specific strategic improvements. And so this is an area where this funding has really helped us expand the help we can provide to agencies to really give them the focused and unique support that they need for their particular place on their journey.
So I know that CISA's always had the federal network resilience team. They always had a group that kind of focused on that federal civilian side, but this seems like it's different. These are people who are going into agencies and saying, okay, what is the challenge? Let us help you solve that challenge. Can you talk a little bit more about the improvement teams?
That's right. These are individuals who are dedicated to supporting particular agencies, and the team is rapidly growing. Again, starting from zero before the American Rescue Plan Act, quickly scaling up. These are individuals who are dedicated to particular agencies to really get an understanding of where the agency is in implementing key security improvements and really be a trusted security advisor and counselor to the agency security team, but backed up by the full breadth of CISA's cybersecurity expertise, services, and capability. So it's really a front door to the broader CISA organization directly supporting a given agency on achieving their shared goals.
You probably know what I'm going to ask next. How many people roughly, which are they in 5 agencies, 20 agencies, and what's the plan for growth?
Yep, we are, I believe, at about a dozen now, rapidly growing. We are appropriated for a significant number more. Right now we are supporting a handful of agencies, in part because we really want to prove out this concept. It's really a new model for the agency, and so our goal is to work with a handful of agencies for a bit, make sure we understand really how to structure this work and how to actually document the improvement plans that we're trying to achieve, and then scale from there and figure out, which agencies we think need help or are interested in being part of this new function, and then building out from there in a way that's going to be both scalable but also enduring.
I imagine finding the right people is always difficult because there's a shortage of cyber workers. But second is agencies are always, at least they have been in the past, kind of, well, do we really want CISA in our business at this level? Because well, if they find something that's bad or find something that's not 100% right, I know CISA's worked really hard to make it not that you're coming in and wagging your finger and saying, look at how bad you are, but okay, problems happen, let's fix them together. Is that part of this culture change that you're talking about? Is not just the way you look at cyber, but the way CISA and interacts with agencies?
Yeah, the first challenge you mentioned really is a paramount one, because individuals for this new function of ours have to be, of course, technical experts to be able to give the right level of expert guidance to agencies, but also need the unique personality to be able to, come work with an agency, build relationships, and do it in a really collegial, collaborative way. We have come an extraordinary way with our partners at federal agencies, to the point where I now think almost across the board, federal CIOs and CISOs and their teams recognize, to put it simply, that CISA is here to help, that our goal really is to help them achieve their goals. CIOs remain accountable for their agencies' IT infrastructure and security risk, but CISA is really here to make their job easier. And I think we've shown over time that we can do that. And the more that we partner, the more that we can do that work really at scale.
The last piece of this, because I know we're running up on the time here, the last piece I just want to talk about is measuring the progress. And I think this is a key piece. It's one thing to say, okay, how is cybersecurity better? Well, we didn't get attacked, right? It's proving the negative sometimes. But when you look at the progress around zero trust and how agencies are moving forward, what are some of the metrics you're using? What are the things you're looking for to say, okay, this is part of that evolution and revolution?
Yeah. So the simplest metric, of course, is the 19 measures and requirements that are codified in the OMB memo, which of course our colleagues at OMB are tracking religiously, and we are supporting them in so doing. But the other piece here is, it is of course possible and actually necessary to decompose the buzzword of zero trust into constituent controls and security measures, and leveraging programs, Jason, you mentioned, like our CDM program. We are actually increasingly able to derive, real valid data from agencies on metrics like, how many public-facing sites have phishing-resistant MFA enabled? How many agencies have deployed tools that would enable them to reliably implement role-based access controls and least privilege principles? And so, apart from the high-level metrics that we are tracking with OMB, we're also really focused on tracking adoption of security controls that are prerequisites to some degree to adopting or making progress in the 5 pillars of our zero trust maturity model. And the more that we can derive that actionable near real-time data through our CDM program, the more we're able to work on that individual basis with federal agencies to recognize gaps based upon data and help them make progress.
And is that where the CDM dashboard plays a big role? Because you know, based on what that dashboard's telling you, if they've adopted the phishing resistant MFA or they've adopted some security controls. Is that where, or do you have another dashboard?
Nope, that's exactly right. One dashboard to rule them all is our philosophy. And so, moving away from a historic model of spreadsheets and data calls to a model where we have CISA provisioned tools and agents that are feeding back into a centralized dashboard where agencies, CIOs, and CISOs can understand their own risk and their own asset posture and their own identity posture, and where CISA can get aggregate data that allows us to identify gaps and areas for needed support.
Eric, in the last minute that we have together, I just want to ask you the getaway question, and we've learned a lot from our conversation today. What's your message to industry? What's your message to agencies when it comes to zero trust? Beyond, of course, I'm going to get ahead of you a little bit. We want to work on this together. Interoperability is important. Don't sell us products we can't use. I mean, I get that, but what do you hope that these folks really get from our conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll offer two. The first is, our partners in industry, in many cases, have extraordinary understanding of federal agency architectures and IT programs, right? There are many partners in industry who have been working with given agencies for years, if not decades. Bringing that insight to bear as another source of expertise and knowledge to help agencies and the federal enterprise accelerate our progress to the next level in our maturity model is really critical, right? This is the approach that we've taken, of course, with our integrators in the CDM program, companies that have been doing this work for years and really understand how technology is deployed within agencies. That expertise is invaluable in helping agencies get it right, because frankly, in many cases, our partners in industry may have been working with an agency longer than federal leadership in the agency has been there. And so that's an invaluable source of expertise. The second piece I'll offer is, obviously there are orders of magnitude more companies in the country than there are federal agencies, and helping us understand from a zero trust perspective what's working in the broader world, what technologies, what processes, what governance models are most effective in helping companies make progress towards increasing their zero trust maturity, and then bringing that back into the government space so we are really benefiting from leading practice across the country and not just adopting bespoke government models that actually aren't consistent with what's working elsewhere.
All right, very good advice, Eric. I know we could talk longer, but this is the end of our session for today. So let me thank my guest. Eric Goldstein is the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency in the Homeland Security Department. Eric, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for taking the time today and joining us.
Thanks so much. My pleasure entirely.
I'm Jason Miller. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the Zero Trust Cyber Exchange.